items that the Marines wanted to have. There was an airfield there. Now, once they had an airfield, that meant they would have some more air support. Secondly, and maybe more importantly to them as a matter of pride, as spirit, the Marine barracks.
The Marine barracks had been wrestled from American control in 1941. Now the Americans were here to get them back. Army and Marine units begin their slow advance toward nearly 3,000 Japanese troops hidden in 4-foot-thick bunkers and underground defenses.
They were tough to get through. They had a lot of caves. The underbrush was extremely thick, and they used it to their best advantage.
We discovered that they even had concrete pillboxes there, which we hadn't realized. And then we had to use flamethrowers and flamethrower tanks to overcome those obstacles.
The Americans make slow progress across the peninsula, fighting against a hidden enemy.
There were a lot of dugouts, and we heard murmuring in them. So we took one of the 5-gallon cans of petrol and poured it all over the top of the dugout. And then we set it on fire. We broke into that pillbox, and they had committed suicide. They put their toes in the trigger guard and put a rifle up underneath their chin and just blow their heads off.
As the sky rains down with lead, the Americans use a tried and tested battlefield weapon.
The Marines trained some dogs to do a variety of chores. First of all, they could search out enemy positions. Secondly, dogs could go into caves where if a Marine went into a cave, he might not ever come out. And finally, in some ways, this is as valuable as any of the others. A dog could be a literal watchdog at night.
The war dogs save many lives in the advance across the island. In the liberation of Guam, 25 are killed. Many are wounded.
A dog was a Marine. If a dog was wounded, they did everything in their power to get it back to an aid station for treatment. If a dog was killed, they tried to retrieve the body for proper burial. That dog was as much a part of the unit, as part of the Corps, as any Marine rifleman was.
On the 7th day of the battle, Army and Marine tanks accompanied by infantry teams cautiously move forward. The Americans fight for higher ground close to the old Marine barracks.
Sometimes you see a head or a brown flash moving to a different position. That was their job, try to get us, like we were trying to get them. Or there was a unwritten code, no prisoners. No quarter. So that's the way it was.
By the end of the week, U.S. casualties on Guam would hit nearly 6,000. But tonight, this fighting force consolidates their positions just 300 yards from the old barracks.
The Marine barracks had fallen into Japanese hands on December 10th, and here was one of those things now where, okay, we can see our objective in sight. We've got to get those Marine barracks and restore our pride.
That night, Marines and GIs make a solemn promise. Come hell or high water, by the end of tomorrow, they'll capture this former U.S. base, where no American troop has set foot in nearly 3 years. But before their honor can be restored, they will have to defeat an enemy preparing to fight to the death. July 28, 1944. The battle for Guam rages. Aerial reconnaissance photographs reveal a unique perspective on the fierce fighting. After 8 days, the American forces have secured the link-up between the two separate beachheads and now advance up the Orote Peninsula. Their main objectives, the enemy airfield and the old Marine barracks. Opposing them, Japanese troops hell-bent on suicide.
They would take a grenade. They had to hit something hard, knock it on their helmet, and just hold it to their chest.
you have no sympathy whatsoever for the enemy. And actually, and I hate to say this, the more you killed, the better you felt. But that's what we were there for.
By early afternoon on day 8, the Americans pushed toward the airfield. It has been virtually by heavy bombardment, but remains tactically vital. Further north, the Marines drive out Japanese diehards and return to their old barracks for the first time since 1941.
There was nothing left of the Marine barracks. I mean, there was just 2x4 sections, but everything was just demolished. But it was the ground itself, what it represented.
The next day, the American flag is raised over the ruins of the old headquarters. To the Colors is played on a captured Japanese bugle, while an honor guard presents arms.
I heard colors so many times, but by God, hearing colors there on Guam is so significant.
To us, that was American territory, and there was tremendous pride.
Yeah, we had a great satisfaction of recapturing Marine territory.
In a speech to the assembled troops, Brigadier General Shepard said, "On this hallowed ground, you officers and men of the 1st Marine Brigade have avenged the loss of our comrades. Under our flag, the island again stands ready to fulfill its destiny as an American fortress in the Pacific." The airfield is also secured on this day. Construction engineers are rushed into action rebuilding the damaged runway. Incredibly, just over 24 hours after its capture, U.S. fighter bombers can operate from the airstrip. But the battle for Guam is far from over. American forces move north to begin clearing the remaining 8,500 Japanese troops from the island. The battle becomes one of jungle warfare.
The jungle fighting, where you couldn't see anything. They could camouflage themselves in the trees or behind bushes or in holes, and you just never knew when you made a step forward what was going to happen.
Of course, we had the flamethrowers, we had the flame-throwing tanks, and we used them as much as we possibly could to get through that dense jungle.
Japanese troops inflict heavy casualties in the thick vegetation.
They were very sneaky and they were very good at camouflage. And then they would fire, but you couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was very stressful.
The advance becomes a battle of attrition in terrible conditions. It affects the way the Americans fight and look.
They didn't look like shining Marines, I'll tell you that. They looked terribly worn out and haggard and dirty and hadn't had a bath, and their dungarees were just filthy, filthy.
Everybody had diarrhea. I lost about 35 pounds. When I got back aboard ship, my own unit didn't even recognize that I lost so much weight.
Morale is raised when the Americans are able to liberate Guamanian citizens, many of them native Chamorro Indians.
They were, I can't describe it, so overjoyed that, I mean, here, you know, they were free again, and we freed them. I mean, there were tears all over the place, both sides. And it was a very touching moment, and it was impossible for you to remain serious. I mean, it was a very emotional moment there.
They were so happy to see us around with the American flag. It was a great sight, a great sight.
And grown men were thanking us and crying because the Japs had really committed atrocities to the Guamanian people, the Chamorros. So I really got a sense of that we have accomplished something good for mankind.
The Americans continue to drive forward. The Japanese defend from a series of higher ground strongholds in the far north of the island.
And they knew that the battle was lost, but they weren't going to surrender, and they just fought right till the last man.
And the fighting was very heavy at that point. There were a lot of hand-to-hand combat because as we approached them, they were beginning to run out of supplies and, I guess, running out of ammunition.
The Japanese commander, Takeshi Takashina, has already died in the battle. His replacement, General Hideyoshi Obata, writes,
"We have only our bare hands to fight with. The holding of Guam has become hopeless. Our souls will defend the island to the very end."
Day 21. Organized Japanese resistance ends. The next day, General Obata commits suicide. The Americans eventually declare the island secure, but for months afterward, mopping up operations continue. Up to 80 Japanese a day are killed.
When we finally secured the island, then we went back and made a complete mop-up across the whole island to pick up any stragglers that we could find.
Eventually, the exhausted Marine and Army units leave the island.
I never thought it was ended. Not until we got aboard that ship.
When I left the island with my comrades and we got on the LCIs and headed out to sea to the troop ship, we thanked the good Lord for protecting us for that length of time.
The battle for the island has cost nearly 8,000 U.S. casualties. The young soldiers become battle-hardened as they leave behind many of their friends.
After you've seen so much combat, you start to create a hard shell. And the first island you invade, you've developed friends, and then a lot of your friends will be killed. By the time you go on your second one, you say to yourself, I'm not going to make any more friends.
For each American killed in action, 11 Japanese died. The cost was high but worthwhile for the men that fought here.
We were rescuing Americans who had heroically and who suffered and were beheaded and were treated cruelly, and we rescued them.
That's why it's important. That's why Guam should get more recognition. It was the first battle. We got American land back.
The Japanese never officially surrender. In 1972, nearly 30 years after the recapture of Guam, a Japanese soldier concedes defeat. This remarkable episode illustrates the sheer tenacity of the enemy faced on Guam. The capture of this Pacific island signals the end of the bloody campaign in the Mariana Islands. Prince Naruhiko Higashikuni was to remark, "The war was lost when the Marianas were taken away from Japan." Guam was soon to become what far-sighted leaders had envisioned: a base for B-29s in their bombing offensive against the enemy war machine, and an American bastion in the Central Pacific from which the Allies could push toward Japan and victory.
That's all for that episode of part 1 of the story, basically. Well, hello, Mark. How are you today? I hope you're doing well. I'm going to continue doing episodes because about where my grandfather was, because I've had a lot of questions. We still have Guadalcanal. We still have Pele Lu, we still have Turk, and we still have Iwu, but I am not 100% sure, like I said, if he made it that far or